Perfect.
And thanks everybody for your interest and attention today. Dr. Tracy Stepanyan is a faculty member in the department. Are we a department? We're a department now of biology within the College of Sciences. And what else? You got to tell me. I can't keep track of those. That says something about my age, I think. But
You know,
go ahead. She's here to
I
talk
think
about online engagement with students in what I think is a special area of concentration, especially for online. Take it away, Tracy.
thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me to come and chat with you guys today. So I'm going to share my screen so that you can see the presentation that I've put together. And I'm hoping that by sharing some of my thoughts on student engagement and online learning, you can learn something from me, and then hopefully in the end, you'll also teach me something. All right. So I wanted to open up with a little bit about me. I've been teaching science courses, both in person and online, for more than 15 years. One of the science courses that I've taught extensively is a general education course called Bio 101, and it's a general education course it's biology for non-majors. So when I started teaching the class probably 13 years ago, we only had maybe 40 students. And then this spring, we've had upwards of 160, which is pretty awesome and also pretty scary all at the same time, right? So what we have is this tremendously diverse demographic. So we have some students who are going into accounting, others who are getting an MBA. And then we have some students that want to be doctors. And then we have this whole cohort that they don't know what they want to do yet, right? So reaching that many students can be really challenging, and keeping them interested in the material and connected to it can also be really challenging. But I think that our backgrounds can sometimes help us reach certain groups of students. So I was a first-generation college student coming from a low-income background. So I'm familiar with some of the challenges that students in that underrepresented group are going to face. So it helps me whenever I'm doing course design or course development to think about the challenges that I faced when I was getting started. So my doctorate is actually in molecular and biomedical pharmacology from the University of Kentucky. And the Instructional Design Center has become my second home, quite literally. I think that Chris and I recently had a conversation about Safe Assign and how to use it as a tool for growth rather than weaponizing it. And poor Mary has talked to me more than she's cared to over the years, probably about a myriad of things. So I'm so grateful. So if you haven't tapped into this resource on the regular like I have, I highly recommend it because it's just an unbelievable staff, great support. So thank you for that. So I thought we should start by talking about what student engagement is. So it's one of those buzz terms, right? Are our students engaged? Well, in order to really understand whether or not they're engaged, we have to know what it means. And that means how much of an active role are our students taking on within their own learning? How much are they part of their academic journey? Are they focused? Are they motivated? Well, we know that if they're actively involved, then yeah, they're motivated, they're focused, and hopefully they're interested in the material. And we know that if they are actively involved, then their chances of graduating and having academic success are much higher. So of course it's important for students to be engaged because we want them to reach the finish line. We want them to finish, but more than that, students who are actively engaged develop these positive study habits, and they have more positive attitudes. And by having a positive attitude and being organized enough to push through the work and the challenges that they are facing, then they're more likely to be successful, not just academically, but also in their careers. So some of the challenges that they face are lack of face-to-face interaction. So if you're teaching a course in the classroom, then what we're going to see are students coming up to us following class asking questions. And in fact, most of us probably end our lectures with something like, do you have any questions about what we covered today? Do you have any questions about last week? So some students' hands will pop right up. Others will wait for everybody else to matriculate out, and then they'll slowly come up to the podium. But what this face-to-face interaction affords is this informal interaction. They don't have to put a lot of thought into their approach, right? They're able to just come up to us and have a conversation. Online, we don't necessarily have that because so much of our communication in asynchronous courses is written. So the student first has to find time to sit down and write an email to me. And then the student has to think, oh, well, what am I going to write? And that can be intimidating too. So there are all these other caveats that come in, and it creates these more formal interactions that can be tough for students. And it can also be hard for them to get motivated when they don't have us being the cheerleader standing in front of them 2 or 3 times a week, right? Saying, oh, you can do this. It's not as hard as it seems. We'll get through it together. And for most of us, when we open up a module, it's open. All the assignments are available to the students, and it's up to them to determine when they complete it. So they have to create their own timeline. And when you have 3 other courses, some of our students have families, some of them have jobs, it gets really tricky because you're like, okay, I'll do it tomorrow. Oh, I'll do it tomorrow. And then the night before class, night before the assignments are due, they're trying to get everything in. And then they have a technical difficulty, right? So Blackboard shut down. Or maybe they can't log into that third-party LMS that we're utilizing for lecture material or quizzes or homework. There's always something. And then there they are sitting alone, and they don't know what to do. So they feel all alone. They don't feel like they're part of a community. So how do we help mitigate these challenges? How can we help our students feel more connected to us and to the other students in the classroom as a whole? So I want you to take a second and reflect quietly on some of the courses that you teach. I mean, something has brought you here to have this conversation with us today. So what is a course that you're finding particularly challenging right now, and why? Do you think it has to do with student engagement? Did you get that DFW report that scares the heck out of all of us? Or has your classroom environment changed post-COVID? Or is it some combination of all of the above or something else entirely? So take a second to think about it and maybe jot down some notes, and we'll ask some discussion questions, and hopefully you'll find some answers in the upcoming slides. So now that I've given you a second to think about your own courses and do some personal reflection, I think we should talk about how we can mitigate some of those challenges that we discussed on the previous slide. So how can we create a sense of community? You'll see that this is really important to me, so I will have dedicated 2 slides to it. We need to implement active learning strategies. So we're going to talk a bit about how to do that. Feedback. What does feedback look like? What do I mean by frequent? And does it go both ways? We need to make the content relevant. So, I come from biology, right? One would think that it's intuitive, but then we start talking about mitochondria. We start talking about chloroplasts and electron transport chains, right? So taken together, it's confusing, and also it's difficult to directly apply that to yourself unless I tell you how to directly apply that to yourself, right? And also, how can we effectively use technology? I mean, we're teaching online courses, so clearly we're incorporating technology in multiple ways. right? So we're going to start with creating a sense of community. So we have to get to know our students, and we have to give them a way to get to know one another. And we should do this from the very beginning. In the first module, there should be some sort of icebreaker post, and it can be on the discussion board, right? And this is where you can introduce yourself to your students can introduce themselves to one another, they can introduce themselves to you, and they can tell you something special or something they think is unique about them, right? And all of this, it's more than just mundane talk. It makes us human. They see that even though we do have this degree, right, and we may be at a different station in life, we were just like them at one time. And now we're also in the thick of it. We have families, we have a job, we're helping our kids get through their educations perhaps. So we share these commonalities, and it's these commonalities that connect us. But you have to talk about those first, right, to find them. Virtual office can also help connect students to one another. So many times we see virtual office as just being a place where students publicly get answers to questions that may apply to all students. But when used appropriately, the virtual office is a place where students can also respond to one another. And then the faculty member jumps back in and says, yeah, that's right. Or, maybe, while that's a great beginning, you might want to think in this direction too. And I always like to have an email the instructor assignment at the beginning of the course. So the email assignment could be something as simple as, let me know that you have access to the course. But once I receive that email from the student, I always follow up. And I'll say, thank you for letting me know you have access. And then I'll let them know to please reach out to me if you have any questions as our course progresses. So what that's doing is making me open to my students, and it's letting them know that I'm with them, right? I'm involved in this with them. And then you have to encourage interaction, and you can do that through discussion boards, group activities. So when talking about the general education courses, like the one that I'm teaching this session with 160 students, I would not do small group activities in a general education class, because what we have is varying levels of commitment, right? So if you have 3 students in a group, which would be a nightmare in and of itself planning wise, but say you have 3 students in a group, 2 students procrastinate a little bit. So maybe they don't post responses until Saturday. Everything is due on Sunday. And then you have that one lonely student who's been posting all week, and they're getting frustrated that they don't get responses. So group activities can be great when implemented appropriately. And to help students feel more connected to you, other students in the material, you can do live sessions. Just because it's an asynchronous course doesn't mean that you can't meet over cookies and coffee on a Tuesday afternoon, right? So you can also do that once in a while. Be responsive. The students need to know that you're present. So respond to student questions and emails or comments. And if you respond promptly, then they're less likely to become disengaged, because they know that they have your support and you're going to keep pushing them in the right direction. And to this end, provide feedback in a timely manner. So if a student submits assignments if the deadline is Sunday and they don't hear from you until 2 Sundays later, well, they've already submitted another assignment, or 15 most likely. And what does that tell them? It tells them that, well, you're not involved. And then it also allows them to continually make the same mistakes, which is what we're hoping to avoid. And I also like to do a check-in with my students. So the first check-in comes in response to that email assignment, right? Whenever I say, hey, I'm here for you. If you have any questions, let me know. About the middle of the course, I like to check in with them again. So I'll post it as an announcement, and I'll send it as an email to all students. And I'll say, hey, how are you doing? How do you feel about your progress in the course? Is there anything that I can do right now to help facilitate that progress? You respond, I'll give you extra credit for that. And you can even respond by saying, I feel really good about where I am right now, but give me something and I'll give you extra credit. So this will be our first discussion question. We're not going to talk about it right now. I kind of want you to sit on it for a little bit and then we'll return to it at the end. So how do you encourage interaction in your online course or courses? Here we go. I told you sense of community is really important. So this is the second part of sense of community, and it's about cheerleading, right? It's about keeping them engaged and involved and letting them know that you've got their back. So be positive, be supportive. So when you're giving feedback, don't just say this was wrong. Oh, and this was also wrong. And dude, you really messed this up. We've got to sandwich it. So say something positive. And I know it can be hard because sometimes I look at it and I go, oh man, I've got to find something here, right? But you can do it. At least they submitted something. So even if it's as basic as opening with, thank you for your submission, it's something. And then, you know, in the upcoming week, I'd like to see you work on the following. If you have any questions, let me know. Again, you're letting them know that you're there for them. And you're also being positive. And hopefully if they do have questions, that will be enough for them to come to you, because some students really do need an invitation, right? They're not just going to come. When you're making announcements, sending emails, also let them know that you see the work that they're putting in, you see what they're doing, and that you're available to help. I also like to give lots of reminders. So in my one-on-one course, for example, students are required to make an initial discussion board post on a Wednesday. What I know about my students is that, again, they have families, they have lives, they have jobs, they have multiple other courses that they're knee deep in, right? So it helps if in their email inbox, they see from me, hey, this is due on Wednesday. And it helps keep them on track time-wise. So this will also help with organization of time, right? Because I'm constantly reminding them. And not once in my history of teaching online courses has a student said, please quit reminding me to do things. It just doesn't happen, because just like us, they also appreciate reminders and celebrate their successes. When you see students doing something great, let them know what you're doing is great. Give me more of that. And if you see a student that's improved significantly, let them know in feedback or send them an individual email. Let them know that you see the work they're putting in. And if you see the whole class is making an improvement, then make an announcement. Say, oh gosh, you guys really rocked this out, right? Let's keep doing that. Keep up the great work. So for this slide, the discussion question is, how do you celebrate your student success? Active learning strategies. So here's another one of those terms, right? Active learning. Some people think this means work for them. So in order to keep students active, that means that I also have to be super active. But that's not necessarily what this means. Active learning can come in a wide variety of ways. So through discussion boards, right? We can think about how to more effectively talk online, more effectively exchange ideas and share ideas. And again, the virtual office is a great place for students to connect with one another and to also connect with us, the instructor. Simulations. Simulations can be added in all kinds of ways to courses that cover a wide variety of topics. And we simulate things all the time. So I'm not sure why this is such a scary thing, because every time the bell rings for the fire drill, we all get up and we go outside. I mean, how many times has there actually been a fire? Never, but we simulate it. And because we simulate it, we're reinforcing the idea. And we've now learned what to do if there's a fire, right? We can all easily evacuate. So these simulations can be designed by the instructor. It can be role playing. So the instructor can take on a role and they can have each of their students take on a role that covers or discusses a topic that's currently being covered during class. And if you're teaching a course with a lab, you may incorporate Labster, which is lab simulations, or you might incorporate another type of laboratory simulation through Pearson, maybe if you're doing anatomy and physiology, or McGraw-Hill, right? So there are multiple ways to bring your class to life and enhance the learning experience for the students. And again, group projects. I'll say it again. In more advanced courses, upper division courses. It's great to do small group projects because you have students who are on a similar track with similar levels of commitment. In general education courses, it's my experience that it's really, really difficult to do small group projects, but you can do large group projects, you know, with 20 or 30 students, if you can think of a way to do that, because then you'll get consistent participation out of multiple students versus just one being left frustrated because they're the only one doing the work. And something else that I've become pretty excited about but haven't implemented yet into my courses are virtual field trips. So with the era of COVID came a lot of negatives, but it also came a lot of positives. Like now you can take students on a trip to the art museum, right? By following a link. You can take them to the aquarium or to the planetarium, and then you can discuss what they're seeing there, or have them go on a scavenger hunt to find certain items. So many things you can do. So the next discussion question is, how do you implement active learning in your courses? Frequent feedback. So address student emails in a timely manner. I find that if I don't address those emails within 24 to 48 hours, then I know they're going to sit in my inbox indefinitely because I need to address it when it first comes. And I'm sure that your courses are very similar. You have a lot of students, which means that you might forget. So it's better to address it immediately. Leave quality feedback within a reasonable amount of time so that they stay focused and they stay engaged, and so that they can continually improve. And when you leave feedback that's quality within a reasonable amount of time, they see that it's specific to them, and they know that you're focusing your attention on them, and they know you care. And make it personalized. Use their name. So in online courses, it's so easy to get lost and just say, oh, you did really well on this. Well, who is you? You know, say, Susie, you did great, right? Create a virtual office within your course, because this gives students, again, a place to connect, and it also gives you an additional way to connect with your students. And I think that the last aspect is the most important. We are assessing our students both formally and informally on the regular. We also have to be able to accept feedback from our students in the moment and take it in the most positive way possible, right? Because some feedback is tough to hear because we'd like to think we're doing everything really, really well. But if a student's willing and strong enough to come to you and say, you know what, I didn't understand the way this was presented at all, then that's significant. So it deserves to be recognized. So the discussion question for feedback is, what are some examples of productive feedback that you utilize? Make the content relevant. So again, I teach biology courses, right? Some chemistry courses, sprinkle in a little anatomy and physiology. But in order to make the content relevant, you have to know your audience. So the way I present material in Bio 101 will be really different than the way I present material in anatomy and physiology, right? So I have to always have in mind what my students need to learn and what is their ultimate goal and what's my goal for these students. We need to use real world examples and applications because we need to connect them to the material. And the only way we're going to really connect to the material is to see how it applies to us, right? So why does this matter to me? Why should I care about mitochondria? Well, I can talk about that all day. But by the end of my class, I hope that my students also understand why I feel so great about mitochondria, and they should too. Involve the students directly. So you can even include questions and assignments that say, you know, this week we discussed this topic. Apply it to your own life. How could you apply it to your own career, right? Use technology, but only when it applies. So use those virtual tours or use those laboratory simulations, use role playing. And again, embrace feedback, encourage it. So accept feedback from the students and also be willing to give them positive feedback. I like to ask, anytime I do something new in the classroom, I like to ask the students, how did you feel about that? How was the delivery? How could I have done that better? And 9 times out of 10, I'll get a response. It may not be what I expect, but I'll get a response. And any response is good. That feedback's valuable, right? Because it helps me make this easier for the students moving forward, more understandable, which enables them to be more connected to the material and learn. And then again, I like to do check-ins with the students. So even if I'm not presenting a new topic, I like to check in with my students and say, hey, how's it going for you so far? Is there something that I can do to facilitate your journey? So the next discussion question is, how do you make course content relevant to your students in an engaging way? So now we're going to talk about technology. So we're embedded in technology, right? Blackboard is tech. Inside of your course, you may have Cengage, or you might have Pearson, or you might have McGraw-Hill, you might have Hope Science, you might have Labster. There's so many different types of technology that we might integrate into a singular course. So it's important that we choose the right technology. So just because I look at something and go, oh, wow, that is so cool, like I'd like to do that, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right thing to push into my course. So the tech we utilize should enhance and complement the learning experience. It shouldn't make things harder. So if I incorporate some technology that students are finding completely frustrating and other facilitators who are on the course are also finding frustrating, then I've done the wrong thing. I need to revisit my implementation of this tech. And we have to be mindful of accessibility. So coming from a low-income background, I always keep the financial burden in mind. So my kids, for example, are really into this Oculus stuff right now, right? This virtual reality technology. And you can see ways in which to utilize it in your courses, but how many students have thousands of dollars to put into VR tech just to use at home for one course? It's completely impractical, right? So keep in mind the financial burden. Even $200 for some additional technology can be quite taxing for students. So if there's an easier way or a more financially minded way to do it, it's probably best to go in that direction. And we have to understand all student needs when we're implementing technology to ensure that it's accessible to all. And be sure your instructions are clear. So if you do a virtual tour, don't just provide a link. Tell them what to do once they follow the link. Or if Cengage is in your course, provide step-by-step instructions on how to register, because this decreases frustration. And it also enables the students to get started immediately, because if they know what to do, 9 times out of 10, they can follow the instructions and they're going to get started and they're going to work harder and be more connected immediately. And be responsive to questions, because tech is hard. I think this morning I saw that there was a Blackboard outage, right? So it's like, it's hard. It's hard for students. It's hard for us. So some of our students have never had exposure to any tech. This is their first online learning experience. So they're just now getting a foothold on how to navigate within Blackboard. And we're telling them that you also have to navigate within Cengage, and you also need to go ahead and do some Labster. It's complex. So be understanding of those questions and answer them quickly, and then that will help decrease frustration on the student's part. Because even if you don't really have an answer, even if the answer is, well, you need to reach out to customer support, they feel heard. And feeling heard is a really big deal. So what are some creative ways that you can think of to implement technology within your online courses? So I want to conclude with a final thought, that while I teach biology classes and you may teach another class, the strategies that I've talked about today, when they're effectively implemented, will result in more active engagement for your students. And that will enhance the student experience, and that will enhance their likelihood for success. Questions, thoughts? Are we ready to talk about our discussion questions amongst ourselves? Wow, this feels like my synchronous online classes.
I think these questions for me as an instructor, where if you work at EKU long enough, you'll wear more than one hat, maybe several hats. But I think about my own instruction and some of the questions, and feedback is a really, it's a really tough, but also probably one of the biggest areas to seek that engagement, because if we can give good feedback, and I have a special way of defining it, and if we give effective and positive feedback, we will encourage students to engage us, to seek us out, to look for more opportunities to deepen their knowledge in terms of whatever we're teaching or learning. And so I appreciate the opportunity to reflect on these things, especially to reflect about feedback, because I'm in the throes of that right now myself.
Yes, and I think that the positive component is critical, because if we're constantly being bombarded with the negative, then that certainly causes us to disengage. And we don't want our students to disengage. We want them to stay with us. And there's always something positive to be said. We may have to search for it. And some days it may feel like we're working harder giving feedback than they did right in a response. But most of the time, I find that my students will come back around and they'll meet me where I'm at. I just have to stay positive.
I think that's very true. And I also think when I think in terms of feedback, and there's this scholar that I always kind of quote, but if you think more about feedback as information about where someone is with relationship to the goal, and hopefully it's a goal that the student has created for themselves, or if it can at least be an agreed upon goal where the students understand and buy into the reason why we have a goal or goals, then I think that eliminates a lot of this negativity, so we can focus on how they made strides to reach that goal, and where are the areas of opportunity or areas for improvement. It personalizes this concept of negative versus positive, I think. So thank you for allowing me to reflect more on that today.
I appreciate that you said personal, because I think that it's also an issue, because sometimes you receive feedback from students and it can be seemingly hostile, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I've been teaching a long time, so I've kind of decompartmentalized, and I don't take it personally, but I do find myself dissecting that email, even the ones that seem hostile. And I'm like, you're hostile for a reason. And honestly, if I have a student who sat through my course and has been miserable the whole session, I feel for that student. So you want to improve that experience, right? And it's not personal. It's not personal. You just have to see it for what it is and try to find what needs to be rectified or what you can do to help others moving forward. So I'll put the questions in front of you. It may help.
I would love to hear from others, even instructional designers in the room who've maybe never taught a class. You certainly have a perspective on these things and are called on by faculty to help with these things. And I'm really interested to know your thoughts.
Chris, I'm not an IDC, but I'm a librarian, so I do have a slightly different, perspective. I'll tell you, we try to tackling this last question about some creative ways to implement technology. If we're embedded online in a course and we're trying to teach something about the library, we've used Jamboard a lot recently for just kind of a simpler way to interact and say, hey, just kind of paste your topic here, go in our databases, pull the permanent link and we can kind of double check and make sure what you're looking at is what you think you're looking at. So can they recognize a scholarly article as opposed to a magazine article or a news article? And so a lot of the students, especially in the eCampus courses, seem to really enjoy having that different way of almost like organizing their thoughts.
So I'm curious with regard to the library, have you had a lot of like chat bot questions, that sort of thing? Because I know that that's becoming, much more of a concern amongst faculty. Even the IDC is giving a little talk on it May 4th, I noted.
Yeah, we've had a couple of kind of similar talks to what Chris has scheduled about ChatGPT in the library. And we're also talking kind of amongst ourselves about, how do you keep up with the AI race as it is, how to use it ethically, how to, there's certain little things that now you can kind of pinpoint, like it's still very mechanical language. So right now it's kind of easier to detect, but it's going to get better at that. Same thing with its sources. That it usually will not produce a correct source if you ask it like where you're getting your information, but again, it's going to get better at that. So what we're really looking at is trying to find ways to ethically use it in the classroom, because we know students are going to use it. So let's teach them some proper ways instead of just kind of letting it free float and letting them use it for, plagiarism type of stuff. So we're not the experts by any means, but we're still wrapping our head around it and trying to keep up with it, just like everybody else.
Yeah, and I think it also helps whenever you think about how to restructure your questions within the classroom. So I think that we're sort of slowly moving away from things like essays when we think about student needs and moving more into application. And then that will also thwart a lot of the, AI perceived plagiarism that we might encounter. But it's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that plagiarism, it's almost being talked about in a very interesting way. Like, what counts anymore? Is it, did you have it help you, or did you have it write it completely? So I think it's fascinating to watch as and Bard's coming out and all of the new stuff. So we are definitely having talks about it, and we are trying to build some resources for folks. But again, it's something new happens every day. So
definitely, it seems like we're always at the end of the curve.
Embry had a text comment, and I think and give me a thumbs up or thumbs down some way, Embry, that, one of the challenges in online asynchronous courses is giving formative assessment and feedback. And sometimes there are issues with scaling that, like students want immediate feedback on, how they're doing. And that's difficult if we want to scale in various ways. And also as a side comment, I think that sometimes we use formative feedback and we weigh it pretty darn high in some courses. And that can be very intimidating for students, and also not give them feedback. When everything is moderate to high stakes, there are problems in there as well. And I don't know if I got the synthesis of what you're communicating, Embry, but just the challenges of giving good formative feedback in appropriate ways through asynchronous teaching and learning.
Yeah, I can see that as challenging too. And I think the more high stakes, the more feedback students want, because they clearly want to know how to improve, right? Which is a good thing. But it certainly makes it more challenging on our end. And then what do you do following that formative assessment? Say you have a student that overall has performed really well in your class, and then you give this high stakes assessment. Do you give students an opportunity to revise and repeat and give them some credit? Or do you just say, well, this is what you did wrong, and move on? You know what I mean? How do you approach that? I think those are important questions, because if we just say, no, you were wrong, and move on, then what we do is discourage and terrify them for the next formative assessment. So, we're not setting them up for a good environment for learning.
Who else would like to speak? There are many years of experience and perspectives in this virtual room. So please lend your voice to the discussion or text.
I was just going to piggyback on Embree's comment too, that it's hard to do this in a situation where you have 190 students who are asynchronous. And so kind of managing those people across the board and being able to make those kind of contact points becomes very, very difficult. And I know we have facilitators, but as kind of the primary instructor, keeping track of everybody, it does get really hard.
Yeah, I would agree. And when you talk about facilitators, they're also generally faculty members that are going to handle and assess and approach response differently than we do, right? Because we're all individuals. And if you're working primarily with, full-time faculty, then we've developed our own approach, our own way to respond. And while the basics may be the same, the wording is quite different. So that can also present a challenge, maintaining consistency in those huge classes.
I don't know how relevant it is for teaching an entire course. Like I said, we get them maybe at a week at best in classes for library week. And so sometimes what we'll do if we're in one of these bigger eCampus courses and we're grading a library assignment is we will focus on the students that are struggling a little more. We give them a little bit more feedback as opposed to the ones that are like, okay, clearly you're getting this. You got to the databases, you found a scholarly article, you know how you're going to use it in your paper. We'll give them something still positive, still very much like, great job. If you need us, here's how to get in touch with us. But for the ones that struggle, we give them a little more like, hey, you did great getting to this database, but it looks like this isn't a scholarly article. Let's get together and talk about this type of thing.
Yeah. And I find that if it's written feedback, like if the student has if it's an open-ended question, it can help to quote what the student has written and then make some basic comment piggybacking on that quote. Like, I like where you're going with this. However, it was missing this part, So use their own words in your feedback.
That's a great tip. Thank you.
One of the things I've always really admired about the way you teach, Tracy, is that you're so connected with your students, even in really large classes. And I know that you're looking at email and you're sending email and you're doing all the things that you talked about in the session today. And I've also seen you be very responsive to when students didn't think an activity was working and you change the activity, in the next iteration of the class. And do you have any suggestions for how to manage that, for just thinking about going for, is there a way to standardize your approach in any way or build any of that in so that other people can benefit from your expertise there?
I think that's what makes our jobs exciting and challenging. There's no standardization to what we do. And every group of students is going to have a different need. However, if during the course I see that a certain type of project simply isn't working, then that makes my life more difficult. And clearly it's making the students' life more difficult. So if we're all working hard for something that simply isn't working, it's like, what's the point, right? And then other things just need to be cleaned up, right? So sometimes if you teach a course and you have 30 students, it looks perfect. But then you teach that same course and you have 160 students every little nuance and issue and problem inconsistency all of a sudden becomes huge, right? So you're seeing it amplified because you've amplified the number of students. So I'm not sure that there's a standard approach besides pay attention, right? And if you're hearing from multiple students that this single question is confusing, then guess what? It's confusing. You need to change it. And little things like that can be changed in the moment. But there are other approaches, like I'm thinking about discussion boards right now, right? So in these discussion boards, we give a topic, and then the student writes or composes an essay with specific headers based on this topic. So with Chatbot, now you can have Chatbot create these beautifully written essays based on, you know, the headers for each of these topics. So now I'm thinking that perhaps rather than writing an essay, it's time to move away from essays and change that project as a whole. It's not that students aren't learning from the topics, the ones who are actually doing it, but I think that the more common the AI technology becomes, the more common it's going to become for students to utilize it directly and copy and paste from it into the text boxes, right, that are provided in Blackboard. And they're not really learning, and our goal is to teach. So if at any point there's an assignment where the students aren't learning and they're making it clear to me that they're not learning, then it's time to modify that content and make it better. So I think being open-minded, you have to be open-minded and realize that it's not personal. Yet again, it's not personal. If you put your heart and soul into it and it's not working for the students, then it's not personal. It's just not working. You need to rethink it. And keeping that open mind and not taking these things personally really will help you go far. And it will help you make better decisions for the class as a whole. You're not attached.
I think what Brittany is saying in chat is where we are moving students up the ladder in terms of cognitive cognitive functioning and the ultimate aims of learning. We can sort of shed concern for a lot of this initial generative text processing that this AI is doing in terms of lower order essays and text-based information. Did I get that right, Brittany?
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I took a drink and half of it went down.
No,
Sure.
I would do that too. That's my timing is impeccable. But-
No, it's, yeah, that's part of what we're trying to kind of build in the library too, is, you know, it, like you said, Chris, Chat GPT and all of those are good at spitting out text and spitting out just knowledge, right? That base knowledge. What is this? How does this affect that? But as you kind of go up the level with Bloom's, you know, remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, create, the higher order thinking you get, the less capable that the AI is, at least right now.
Who has more to add? You know, for me, at the end of the day, a lot of this is about relationship building, and that's kind of what we're doing 8 or 16 weeks at a time. You know, the more we show our desire and attitude and availability is geared towards success of the student, and the more we communicate that in positive and functional and needed ways. Sometimes we have to listen for how we're needed. You know, we build those good relationships and the foundation for a successful online learning environment. Anything else, Tracy? Final thoughts, or is that a wrap?
I appreciate you all coming and listening to me talk about student engagement, though, because that, that tells me that you care and that you're trying to make this better for your students and for yourselves. And if you happen to be like my in-person students and you have questions later that you want to send privately, feel free to email me. I'm always just an email away. And thanks again for your time, and thanks for inviting me to come and chat about something that I hold so near and dear to my heart, student engagement.
Thank you all so very much. I appreciate your time, Tracy, and audience. Thank you so much for your time and attention today. And as always, to be continued on this stuff, right? The job's never done. So again, thank you. And I'll stop the recording. You can say whatever you want off the record now.